Members, this is the appointed time and we have a quorum, so I call this meeting to order. This is the panel on constitutional affairs. Item 1. Information papers issued since the last meeting. The Secretariat issued some information papers to members since the last meeting, which you should have seen on the agenda. And let me explain a few things to members. It includes a letter dated the 19th of March from Mr. Dennis KWOK. As I understand, the administration is preparing a written response. It should be ready within this week. It will be submitted to our panel and the security panel for members' reference. Yes, Mr. Dennis KWOK. My letter relates to chasing away a foreign correspondent out of Hong Kong, and I want to know whether we can arrange for a meeting to discuss this matter. I see from your letter that you have requested a joint meeting with the security panel, and after receiving their response, I will discuss with the panel on security on how it should be dealt with, including your suggestion of a joint panel meeting. Members will be informed in due course. And also last night, I received a joint letter signed by 5 Civic Party members. I was given a copy by email via the Secretariat last night. I haven't had time to study the content of the letter. According to your letter, in relation to the issue of Article 22 of the Basic Law, you have requested to call for a special meeting. Now, we do not have such an item on the agenda today, but after today's meeting, I will go back and consider carefully whether we should discuss this issue at the Constitutional Affairs panel, and whether this should be put on the agenda of a regular meeting or a special meeting. Dr. Helena Wong. I just wrote in to you, Chairman, because the Liaison Office and the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office made some comments recently leading to a constitutional crisis in Hong Kong on interpretation of Article 22 of the Basic Law, and also the statements from the 2 offices. I think it's a matter of urgency. The Democratic Party, therefore, also requests an urgent special meeting with the administration through you. I understand that this is not on today's agenda, but this is a very important matter, because it hinges on the fundamental constitutional structure in Hong Kong. So, Chairman, please call for such a meeting as soon as possible. Mr. Lam Shek-ting. Chairman, it is such a major controversy in Hong Kong. It also affects the political structure in Hong Kong. Is it that we already have the Liaison Office as the superior structure transcending the SAR government, overseeing the day-to-day operation of our government? Is it already against the principles of high degree of autonomy and Hong Kong people administering Hong Kong? Is such a major political controversy, Chairman? I don't think you need to consider it. You should call for a special meeting as soon as possible. Say, Mrs. Regina Ip all of a sudden came to her senses, so to speak, and then said that Article 22 excludes the 2 offices and changed her political stance? Or is it the case that the government's interpretation has all along been correct and the 2 offices should come under Article 22? It is very important because it also affects the high degree of autonomy in Hong Kong. We understand that this is not a discussion item today. I need to impose a time limit, or else it would affect our business here. 1 minute each. Mr. Dennis KWOK. I believe this is not just about Mrs. Regina Ip's ignorance of her own position on Article 22. It seems that even the government itself is unclear about the constitutional position of Article 22. Within 2 hours, the press release was changed how many times? 3 times? So 2 press releases, which also contradicted with the position back in 2007. So it's really unprecedented. I don't know what the government has become. Why did it have to change the press release twice? Did somebody ring Patrick Nip, the secretary, telling him that he's got his homework wrong, and then after one amendment, another amendment was needed? This is such an eyesore. It's really beyond belief. I don't know why we're here if we are not here to discuss it, Mr. Alvin Yeung. Of course, it's really bizarre that the press release could change 3 times a night. It overturns our understanding for 22 years. In fact, not only the government should feel embarrassed, the pro-establishment camp here should also feel embarrassed, especially those who once defended the government on its interpretation of Article 22 of the Basic Law. Well, regarding whether one country, 2 systems principle still exists and our reputation in a global stage, it is of paramount importance. Chairman, it is of such importance that I think a special meeting should be called for as soon as possible so that Mr. Patrick Nip can come here and explain to us, especially when in the Council, Mr. Patrick Nip made a statement which totally contradicts with the present position. Just on this point itself, I think there is ground to call for a meeting. Next, Ms. Wong Kok Hin. Chairman, I'm not opposed to the proposal of discussing this item here. Indeed, I think the government should explain about the different press releases issued. It hinges on our understanding on the basic law. It has not been correct, and this is basically what is encompassed in the 2 officers' statements. So perhaps we should have a new understanding of the basic law in the future. But I don't think it is a matter of urgency, because it is the central authorities that have the power to draw up the basic law and interpret the basic law. It is not up to us, not up to the Hong Kong SAR government to say whether it is correct or not. It's a matter of how the basic law is interpreted. It is not urgent, however, in my view. Dr. Priscilla Leung, I don't think there is any new or old interpretation of the basic law. It's just a matter of correct or incorrect understanding. Well, civil service exams have a multiple choice format for basic law test, and I've been criticizing it for over a decade. I think sooner or later we will see a blunder. Just take a look at Article 48, paragraph 3. To sign bills passed by the LegCo and promulgate laws and budget passed by LegCo, and then a report should be made to the Central People's Government. And in many provisions, the Central People's Government is mentioned. The liaison office is the liaison for Central People's Government in Hong Kong. We need to understand the structure in Hong Kong. In Article 159, 158, it refers to the State Council. Do you know about the operation of the State Council? You should not just focus on Article 22, because all articles in the Basic Law are intertwined. I don't think we can have a short discussion here. But anyway, Chairman, we should ask experts of the Basic Law to participate in this discussion, not just some government officials here. It's pointless to have this debate otherwise. I'm sorry, time's up. Otherwise, it would take up too much time and we won't be able to discuss other items. Mr. Lee. Chairman, I think if we are to discuss this issue, Article 22 is just one of the aspects. Since the promulgation of the Basic Law, not many people have had a correct understanding of the Basic Law. It also involves the relationship between Hong Kong and the Central People's Government. It is also an important aspect of implementing one country, two systems principle. We also need to read Article 12. Hong Kong SAR shall be a local administrative region of the People's Republic of China, which shall enjoy a high degree of autonomy and come directly under the CPG. As it comes under the CPG directly, there are other departments of the CPG set up in Hong Kong, including the liaison office, to ensure that the Basic Law can be implemented successfully in Hong Kong. So, Chairman, I think a comprehensive information paper should be provided by the administration, because the relation between Hong Kong and the CPG is of utmost importance. Next. Well, of course, the CMAB issued 3 different versions of the press release showing a discrepancy in the understanding of Article 22 of the Basic Law by some government officials. This is disappointing, but Basic Law is, after all, not something new. The opposition camp has been upholding the wrong belief of the Basic Law, including Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting. Apart from national defense and foreign affairs, all these other matters are not within the remit of the CPG. This is exactly why he is wrong. We do not have a federal state. Well, like Ms. Starry Lee said, according to Article 12 of the Basic Law, the Hong Kong SAR comes directly under the CPG. Whether or not the liaison office is set up under Article 22 of the Basic Law, it is not of importance. The Basic Law also involves the relationship between Hong Kong and the CPG and the whole structure. Next, Mr. Holden Chow. Thank you, Chairman. Well, things are clear now, and yesterday Mrs. Regina Ip also pointed out very clearly that, in fact, within the government, some government officials do not have adequate understanding of the Basic Law. They stand to be corrected, and now the opposition camp is so anxious. They're trying to stir up trouble. I think this is red herring. Well, the argument started with their effort to paralyze the operation of the council with their tricks at the House Committee. And I think it's very clear about Article 22. There is inadequate understanding of the Basic Law on the part of some government officials. So we should just invite them to explain. We should not allow them to have red herring here to pull wool over the eyes of the public. Next, Dr. KWOK. Chairman, I don't know whether the pro-establishment camp know any shame. At the council meeting of the 13th of June 2018, why didn't they pounce on Mr. Patrick Nip when he made that statement? They've been using the same statement for 20 years. From year 2000, they have been relying on Article 22 in replying to our questions in this council. It seems that they've all just woke up all of a sudden. Even EXCO members, how outrageous you are trying to be the representative. You just the echo chamber for the CPG. You do not exercise your own thinking. Hong Kong now practices one country, one system, not one country, two systems, not anymore. Hong Kong people's concern is when this will happen. So you should tell Hong Kong people that we must defend one country, two systems. We must not allow Beijing officials to wag their tongue here. Next, Dr. Fernando Cheung. Well, this is not stirring things up. We have been adopting the same understanding of the Basic Law, and that no department of the CPG should interfere with the affairs which Hong Kong SAR administers on its own. I mean, in writing and also verbally, the government has been holding the same position. All of a sudden, liaison office had a distorted understanding of the Article 22, and then the pro-establishment camp just chimed in all of a sudden, and even the SAR government had to change the press release time and again to toe the liaison officer's line. This is a blatant distortion of the basic law. It also takes away the safeguard of one country, two systems provided by the basic law. We need to call for a special meeting as soon as possible so that the SAR government can give an account to the public. We must not casually allow the basic law to be distorted.
Mr. Jeremy Tam. Thank you, Chairman. Just now, some fellow members said that Regina Yip sounded very authoritative. On the 2nd of April 2017, the Regina Yip's election manager said that the Chinese liaison officer interfered in the elections and Hong Kong's people's trust in the government is lost. He wrote that in Hong Kong Free Press, saying that Regina Yip should be most qualified as the chief executive in Hong Kong. But then the Chinese liaison officer stepped in and they contravened Article 22. So your team said the same thing, and now, Mrs. Yip, you had an about turn today. And the government doesn't know how to deal with Article 22. Maybe tomorrow the Chinese liaison officer will call up the IRD to ask it to refund the property owners. Will that be done? Will you do that, Mr. Eddie Chu? Thank you, Chairman. As to whether Chinese liaison officers was established under Article 22.2, that's not the crux of the matter. And what matters most is in 2000, whether it's Jiang En-zhu or the State Council said categorically that the Chinese liaison officer will not interfere in Hong Kong affairs and they should abide by Hong Kong laws. Now you said that Chinese liaison officer is above Article 22, 1, 2, and 3. So what is the basis of saying that? If you said that there is no basis, then back then you said that you would abide by the law. I mean, this is something just coming out of yourself. So it means that you will abide by the law or not abide by the law whenever you like. So I think we must discuss this thoroughly. Next one, Mr. Martin Liao. Please give the floor to Mr. Martin Liao. Chairman, I think we can discuss this, but it should not be in the form of a special meeting. There is no urgency. I totally disagree that there is a constitutional crisis. The opposition camp, which aims to burn Hong Kong down together with them, has been saying that the Hong Kong Macau's Affairs Office and the Chinese Liaison Office has been interfering in Hong Kong affairs. How come that they suddenly come up with the idea of a constitutional crisis now? I don't mind having it discussed, but definitely not at a special meeting. There is no urgency, and it cannot jump the queue either. There are other items. We can discuss that at a regular meeting in the future. We should not do it in the form of a special meeting. Ms. Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chairman. What is certain now is we are facing a constitutional crisis, and all of a sudden they have disrupted our understanding all along. It seems that we've been, this is our mother all along, but then suddenly she becomes not our mother, and they are overbearing, and they have moved the goalposts so far away, and you say whatever you like, do whatever you like, and the ultimate stance on their part is that they are the law, and as long as this is law, then it should be the law then. This is impossible. They have now come up with some ground rules and say if needed, I can say whatever I like, I do whatever I like. And Hong Kong must toe the Chinese liaison office's line. How can that be acceptable? Next one, Mr. Yip Kin Yun. Mr. Yip. Just now, Mr. Martin Liao said that this matter is of no urgency. I beg to differ. In our discussion just now, we can see that, well, at least the pro-establishment camp members say that government officers don't understand the basic law. And there has been a lot of misunderstanding, hence the changing of the press statements 3 times in one evening. So if the Hong Kong government officers have misunderstanding of the basic law, don't you think this is a very serious and urgent matter? This should definitely be discussed. And also for the society as a whole, thinks differently from the Chinese liaison office. So this is a most bewildering situation. People have different opinions, divergent opinions. So we do not have a very sound constitutional base here. So how can we allow that to sustain? So we must discuss this quickly. Dr. Zhang, of course we understand, and I believe that the opposition camp members understand this as well. The Central People's Government has sovereignty over Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office has been empowered by the CPG to deal with Hong Kong matters, and Chinese Liaison Office is a representative office of the CPG. So the Chinese Liaison Office has been involved in a lot of liaison work. Say, if you like to contact certain departments in the on the mainland and Hong Kong people needing help in the mainland, then the Chinese Liaison Office will step in. And the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office has a clear role as well. It will be taking up tasks requested on their part by the CPG. So the 2 officers have spoken out this time, and we all know the reasons. And that's because you would like to undermine. Next one, Mr. Rai Kwong. Chairman, well, the Chinese liaison officer has been saying things, telling us what to do, and then during one night, 3 different press releases have been issued. We can imagine that the government has been taken to task by the Chinese liaison officer. Now, Article 22 talks about Department of the CPG. Does it cover the 2 officers? And then all of a sudden, we have come up with a new interpretation of that article. Shouldn't it be discussed urgently? You said that it is not covered by Article 22, but you've bought 84 properties, and you've got a stamp duty waiver of $200 million in the past few years. So shouldn't you be discussed? Well, we must discuss whether 1 country, 2 systems and high autonomy still exist in Hong Kong. We must hold a meeting as soon as possible. Mrs. Virginia Yip, I think mistakes have to be amended. Whether the mistakes have lasted for 20 or 30 years. Well, in the court, this often happens. We should make amends to mistakes. So the prohibition on face covering regulation, the ruling of the CFI has been overturned by the Court of Appeal. So the highest authority has the last say, and that is set out clearly in the basic law. It's understandable that Hong Kong government officers don't understand the basic law because they have been they have switched posts, for very frequently. And Pinkstone, my partner, he didn't understand the basic law. That's not so unexpected. But let's take a look at Article 22, paragraph 2. Mr. Albert Chan has explained clearly the Chinese Liaison Office was formerly the Xinhua News Agency and was established before the handover. So it doesn't come under the Article 22, bracket 2. And that is not an office set up under the central government and with the consent of the SAR government. Mr. James Toh, it is a constitutional crisis. The 2 offices, the Chinese Liaison Office and Hong Kong Macau Affairs Office, said for the first time they are not governed by Article 22. And Mrs. Virginia Yip referred to the government offices being rotated around different departments. That's no excuse. The government officers has given us some formal replies here, and they've been using the same line for 20 years, not to mention Mr. JiangEnzhu, who said the same. Now, whether it's an office setup or it's a department of the CPG, and Chinese liaison office is definitely a department of the CPG, and then our different departments representatives within the Chinese liaison office. So does it mean then that all these departments in the Chinese liaison office can interfere in Hong Kong affairs? Mr. Raymond Chan, we've been arguing whether the liaison office has been interfering into Hong Kong affairs. And Mrs. Carol Lam also said the same. Well, is it that they should not even be showing their concern? But then in the past few days, we are discussing whether they have the right to interfere. Now, it seems that if they don't interfere, then there is a dereliction of duty on the part of the liaison office. Now, the pro-establishment camp, of course, they think they have the power to interfere, and they can even direct us what to do. Now, every year spent so much in promoting the basic law, and it's just laughable that nobody, even including the government officers, understand the basic law. So should we be cutting the expenses on promoting the basic law? The senior, middle level, and junior level government officers don't understand the basic law at all. It's a waste of time and money in promoting the basic law. Dr. Chang Chung Tai, we're just making amends to mistakes. Well, can it be possible that we've been in the wrong for 20 years and now we have to make amends? Well, everybody knows that this is not amending the mistake, is blatantly a change in the policy, and that is to affirm that the Chinese liaison office can interfere in Hong Kong affairs, and this is a policy change. But then they are distorting the basic law, and they are trying to do things ultra virus in order to do that. So I don't think Hong Kong people will believe or have trust in the basic law and the one country, two systems any longer. So this is a constitutional crisis. I think we should discuss this ASAP and get this clarified. Mr. Kok Wai Kang, please give the floor to Mr. KWOK, please. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I also agree that we can discuss it, but there is no urgency. Of course, the opposition camp will try to focus on the coverage of Article 22. The Chinese, the two officers' statements said two things very clearly. And then in the past 23 years, they've been trying to be very nice to you, but it doesn't work. So the opposition camp is trying to burn Hong Kong down together with them, so this can no longer be accepted. And then in the past, we emphasized a high level of autonomy. There was no discussion on the role of the CPG. Now today, we tell you clearly that the CPG has the responsibility and the authority to supervise Hong Kong's governance. So don't try to draw things out of proportion. It's not that you would do whatever you like. Mr. Junior So would like to speak. Anyone who would like to speak on this subject matter? If not, then the last one to speak will be Dr. Junior So. Thank you, Chairman. Last week, I said that we should not just look at Article 22. We should not make generalization out of that. We would also have to look at Articles 12, 13, 14. And 12 says that the SAR government is directly under this CPG, and Article 13 talks about foreign affairs, and Article 14 is about national defense and the military. So when we look at the Chinese liaison office, we should not just look at Article 22. It is a mouthpiece of the CPG, and it is directly under the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. So you should not just refer to Article 22 saying that they don't have the authority. Everybody should abide by the law, of course, but then to what extent is a question. Does it mean that the acts of the PLA should be, say, approved by the Hong Kong police and so on? So they should abide by the law, but not in the way that they said they should do so.
Well, members have spoken, and I've heard you loud and clear. I'll go back and consider carefully how I should deal with this issue, including whether this should be put on the list of outstanding items for discussion, or whether we should call for a special meeting on an urgent basis. But of course, if we called for an urgent meeting, we are putting priority to this item over others. I need to consider two grounds. First, whether this entails on a grave public interest, and second, whether it is an urgent matter that should be accorded priority. At the same time, I've also asked the government to provide a written response to our panel, and once that is received, it will be forwarded to members. But as I said in the beginning of the meeting, we're not going to discuss it here because we have other items already set down. Dr. Helena Wong, it's a point of order, Chairman. We want to call for an urgent special meeting. It's not a matter of prioritizing this over other items already on our agenda, because we have regular meetings and we're not trying to jump that queue. We suggest this is an urgent special meeting. We're not waiting for the next regular meeting to discuss this item. I think you need to clarify this. For other panels, sometimes special meetings will also be convened to deal with urgent issues. As I mentioned just now, I'll consider the two grounds, whether it is of grave public interest and also whether it is urgent. I've heard you. All right, items for discussion at the next meeting. The next regular meeting will be held on a Monday, 18th of May at 2:30 p.m. The administration's proposed to discuss two items. First, a briefing by EOC and also the practical arrangement and publicity plan for electrical election. And also we have matters arising from the meeting on the 16th of March 2020. You may recall at the last meeting we ran out of time and therefore we could not deal with the motions moved by Ms. Sari Lee, Mr. Alvin Young, Mr. Ben Chen, and also Dr. Helena Wong. And members agreed that these motions should be voted on at this meeting. We have four meetings. We have four motions today. Mr. Ben Chen is otherwise engaged. He's not here. In accordance with the handbook, the mover of the motion should be present to read out the motion so that we can discuss whether to proceed with voting on the motion. So I'm afraid we cannot deal with Mr. Ben Chen's motion today. We have Ms. Sari Lee's motion, Mr. Alvin Young's motion, and also Dr. Helena Wong's motion. It's a two-step process. I think we all understand. First step is for members to vote on whether we should deal with the motion, and the next step is for us to vote on the motion itself. You may recall last time that we will take this two-step process, but we will not open the floor for further discussion. That's what we agreed last time. So let's first start with Ms. Sari Lee's motion. Ring the bell, please. Chairman, should I read it out? As the DC general election 2019 entailed a lot of violence and unfairness, many pro-establishment camp candidates were subject to the threat of black violence in the electioneering activities. And yet in the report there has not been any strong reprimand on these matters. The EAC had not come up with any investigation outcome on any of these complaints against violence. We express dismay and disappointment on the performance of the EAC, and we urge the EAC to come up with practicable improvement proposals in the future guidelines on electrical election, including but not limited to e-balloting, and also for senior voters to be given priority on voting arrangements, and to authorize ICAC officers to be stationed in polling stations to deal with any corrupt or illegal conduct, and to provide advice to the polling or to the presiding officer to prevent violence, unfairness, and chaos from arising again. Mr. Jeremy Tam, I want to know whether the motion moved without notice is legally binding? No. So is it that afterwards we can have a 3-minute discussion on the motions before we vote on it? Isn't it filibustering? Like I said just now, at the last meeting, we agreed that we will take the two-step process of voting, and that the floor will not be open for discussion. What if somebody then changed stance? That's it. That's why the motion moved under Section 37A should not be moved. That's all. Remember that we are going to vote on whether we should proceed with voting on Ms. Darity's motion. Please press the key to show your presence, and then you can vote. Press the voting button. Before I close the vote, please check your votes. Voting is closed. Voting result is displayed: 24, 19 against. So we endorse Mr. Lee's motion should be dealt with. Next, Mr. Alvin Yeung, please claim division. Yes, please ring the bell.
係點啊？話俾位置員。
Dr. Helena Wong, you said just now that the voting on the last bit was about whether Mr. Lee's motion should be dealt with. It will be dealt with according to the vote of 20 versus 19. Then shouldn't we formally vote on the matter? We will proceed with the first step of the three motions first, and then we will formally vote on the motions. No, this can't do, Chairman. Unless these three motions are not related to the discussion last time. Otherwise, the pro-establishment camp is winning by one vote, and if you rely on this and stop us from voting on the other two motions, then it's not fair. You cannot really just deal with Mr. Lee's motion. It is not fair. I've been in this council for 8 years. I don't think you're handling it fairly. I don't really understand your criticism. Unless you're suggesting that the motions moved by the other two members are not related to the items being discussed, you cannot be selective. You are not fair at all. I think we should ask for advice from the legal advisor and the secretariat. I already discussed with the legal advisor before the meeting on how this should be handled. I do not make my own rules. Dr. Helena Wong, I think this is also the usual practice at other panel meetings. I don't know where you're coming from, Dr. Helena Wong. Are you suggesting that we don't need to vote on the same vote on each motion, and that we should just apply the voting result to all motions? Mr. Alvin Yeung, please read it out and ring the bell. This panel requests the EAC to take all practicable and appropriate means in the future elections, including but not limited to the hiring of venues, to ensure that there would be sufficient polling stations and ballot issuing desks for voters because of the rise in the number of registered voters, and also to request the ratio to be lowered from 1,500 voters per desk to 1,200 people per desk, and there is no need to increase the carrying team for voters to fulfill their civic duty.
係阿黃定光議員。
Yes, Mr. Wong Ting Kwong. Point of elucidation, please, Chairman. Of course, I respect your decision. Are we going to vote on whether we should deal with subsequent motions? And if that is the case, do we still have time to discuss the items? As I mentioned just now, we vote on whether we should deal with the motions, and then there will be no more discussion. We'll proceed to voting on the motions themselves. So no more discussion, right? We will immediately vote on the motions, right?
胡志偉議員係。
Mr. Wuchiwai. Why is it that there should not be discussion? Were you here at the last meeting? Last time I already stressed towards the end of the meeting what our decision is. I didn't make this decision just now. Members present at the last meeting agreed to this. Mr. Jeremy Tam. In my recollection, in all fairness, we agreed that there should not be further discussion because we wanted to vote on the motions last time. But this is another meeting. I'm not saying that we should open the floor again. I want to make it clear that last time we agreed not to have further discussion because we wanted to vote on the motions. You are just half right. We agreed that there should not be further discussion, but it's not premised on the fact that we should vote on the motions last time. Yes, Mr. Stephen Ho. Right. I was democratic. I discussed with members last time, and now I'm being criticized. I really don't know what else to do. Speaker's not coming through. How can I answer your question on behalf of other chairmen? Mr. Stephen Ho. Let's say if we agree that Mr. Alvin Yeung's motion should be voted on, the substance of the motion actually contradicts with Mr. Lee's motion. Say, if we would like to have the care team, that Mr. Alvin Yeung would not like to have the care team, and if we support Mr. Lee's motion, do we still need to vote on Mr. Alvin Yeung's motion? We noticed this issue as well, and we discussed with the legal advisor. It depends on what motions have been passed. And say if Sarah Lee and Mr. Alvin Yeung's motion are both passed, then I need to deal with the issue. As per legal advisor's opinion, I would need to ask whether Mr. Alvin Yeung would like to amend his motion. Otherwise, if Mr. Lee's motion is passed, we cannot deal with his motion. That's a technical point.
Dr. N. Chang, I would like to ask, whether we support dealing with the certain motion, the main consideration is whether it is directly related to the agenda item in the last meeting. Is that right? Yes, it's directly related, or else I will not be putting this to the vote. But then as to whether you support the content of the motions, it will be up to members to decide. Supporting the content of the motion? Well, agreeing to deal with this motion. Yes, that's right. So as long as it's directly related to the agenda item, then that can be dealt with. No. These are two separate matters. All right, please press the attendance button and then vote. Please check your vote before I declare the results. Voting is closed. Display of results. 34, 8 against. So we endorse that this motion shall be dealt with. And then the third motion is moved by Dr. Helena Wong. There is one left only. Well, the division bell has been rung. Do we need to ring the division bell again? No? So there is no need to ring the bell for 5 minutes. So Dr. Eleanor, please read the motion and then we'll put it to vote. Dr. Wong, please. Dr. N. Zhang, I would suggest that the ringing time be reduced to 1 minute. Okay, Dr. Eleanor Wong. This panel urges the government to take all practicable steps to ensure that the election is fair and impartial, including substantially increasing the number of polling stations and manpower to shorten the waiting time for electors to cast a vote, and to ensure that during the course of election, all electors are treated equally and that nobody should be allowed to jump the queue. Second, to stringently monitor the handling of ballot papers at the polling stations to stem out any falsification and other acts that will undermine the fairness of the election. Third, the public area in the polling station should not have a limit to the number of people, and there should not be any real name registration system, and the electors' right to monitor the election should not be infringed upon. So I am the mover. A seconder is Lam Chak-ting. So we will proceed to the vote, please. Please press the attendance button and then the relevant voting button. Please check your votes before I declare the results. Voting is closed. Please display of results. 29 for, 11 against. So we agree that we would deal with Dr. Helena Wong's motion. So all the three, we agree that we should deal with all the three motions. I have to deal with the technical issues raised by Mr. Stephen Ho. Members, As pointed out by a member, Ms. Starry Lee's motion and Mr. Alvin Young's motion, there is contradiction in one sentence, and Ms. Starry Lee says that voters with senior citizens card should have priority in voting, and that goes against Mr. Alvin Young's motion, saying that there is no need to increase the number of priority queues. If Ms. Starry Lee's motion is endorsed, then Mr. Alvin Young has to consider whether to amend the particular sentence. Otherwise, if we endorse Ms. Lee's motion, there is no way that we can vote on Mr. Alvin Young's motion. Do you get my point? And then the legal advisor raised that something about Dr. Helena Wong's motion. There is one sentence which needs to be further considered. Ms. Starry Lee's motion says that elderly should be given priority in casting the vote. But Dr. Helena Wong's motion, the first point is that nobody should be allowed to jump the queue. So if there is priority queuing, then that means somebody is allowed to jump the queue. So there is contradiction there. Dr. Helena Wong, in many panel meetings, the approach that we have used all along is that you should support and object and abstain whatever you like. But then we would not be, considering whether another motion needs to be put to a vote after the vote has been taken on one motion, the previous motion. Well, but we can't contradict ourselves among the different motions. There should not be two different stances adopted by the panel, right? So in that case, we'll have to consider which motion should be voted on first. Well, I'll abide by the order in which the motion was submitted. Secretariat, I would like to ask, is there any thing mentioned in the rule of procedure that for motions moved by members at the panel meetings, there is the requirement that we should look at the content of the later motions to see whether they contradict with the earlier motions before they can be dealt with? According to the chairman's manual of the panel meetings, there is indeed a requirement saying that if two motions are sort of contradicting to each other, then we have to consider, say that if motion A is endorsed, motion B will not be handled. So for the same goes with panel meetings, is that right? Yes. The chairman's manual or handbook for the panels. Nobody is allowed to jump the queue. Are you telling me that you should allow people to jump the queue? If you call that a contradiction, then I think it's really mind-blowing. So maybe you should ask the one who moved the motion what exactly she meant. So how can you say that this contradicts with a Starry Lee's motion? Well, you're not telling me that somebody should be allowed to jump the queue, right? So if you're not telling me that, then let's vote on this. Anyway, Dr. N. Zhang. Well, let's stick to the approach used by the panels all along. Let's proceed with the vote. In any case, the legal advisor and the secretariat have raised new points, but this was not done in the past, right? So maybe after the meeting, the clerk can study further into this, and the Secretary General can clarify things before we put the new rule into practice. The legal advisor highlighted a certain sentence in Dr. Helena Wong's motion. I think it falls into gray area. I would well, for Mr. Alvin Young's motion, it contradicts with Ms. Dory Lee's. And for Dr. Helena Wong's motion, I would say that we vote on it as it is. There is no need to amend it. Mr. Alvin Young, are you going to amend your motion? No, I won't change the motion. Let's deal with Ms. Dory Lee's motion. If it is endorsed, and we can't deal with Mr. Alvin Young's motion, but then we can still deal with Dr. Helena Wong's motion. So let's see what the results for the first motion is. Okay, it's claiming of division, right? We've already have the division bell rung. Is there a need to have the bell further rung? No. Okay, let's proceed directly to voting on Ms. Starry Lee's motion. Please vote on it to see whether you support it or not. So please vote. Before I declare the results, please check your vote. Voting is closed. Results are displayed. 22 for, 18 against. So Ms. Starry Lee's motion is carried. So in that case, I can't deal with Mr. Alvin Young's motion. Then let's vote on Dr. Helena Wong's motion. Yes, Mr. Stephen Ho? I hope that Dr. Helena Wong can clarify what she said in point 1, whether our priority queue should be set for the elderly, the pregnant women, and so on, because what she meant will affect my vote. She can't be ambiguous in this. No, I won't allow for discussion on this. So, Dr. Helena Wong? Would you like to clarify? I don't have anything to add. Anyone who is literate will understand what is meant by not allowing anyone to jump the queue. So please press a button to show your stance. Before I declare the voting results, please check your vote. Voting is closed. Display of results. 18 for, 19 against. So the motion is negatived. All right, so we are done with the matters arising from the last meeting. All right. The fourth item is administrative guidelines and promotion of racial equality. The government team comprises Mr. Andy Chan, Undersecretary for Constitution and Mainland Affairs, PS Ms. Judy Zhong, and Assistant Secretary Ms. Kathy Lee. Mr. Raymond Chan. Well, the agenda item should take us to 3:35, and after that, we still have the briefing by the PCPD. So how are you going to deal with these items? Well, the timing actually depends on how many members would like to speak or raise the questions, and if not much time is left after this item, then I will consider whether we have sufficient time to deal with agenda item 5. If not, then that will be saved for the next meeting. Members who would like to speak, please press the button. And then Mr. Andy Chan, please take us through your paper. And then I'll open the floor to questions by members. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. The government is committed to building a caring society. For the EMs, our policy goal is very clear. We are against racial discrimination and promote equal opportunities for EMs. We have the Basic Law, the Hong Kong Bill of Rights Ordinance, and the Race Discrimination Ordinance to help us do our work. In terms of public services, different police bureaus and departments are providing different services to ethnic minorities. While on the administrative level, we have the administrative guidelines and promotion of racial equality. These guidelines will help government departments in formulating and implementing policies to promote racial equality. In the 2018 policy address, the government announced that the guidelines will be refined for application to all government bureaus and departments, as well as related organizations providing services to EMs. So we call these public authorities. We have completed the refining work, and the guidelines aim to provide to enhance awareness on the need for racial diversity and inclusion, as well as equity considerations in the formulation of policies, so that people, regardless of their race, enjoy equal access to public services.
The major changes is in the revised guidelines is the inclusion of 2 new guidance notes on language services and data collection on service users of diverse race, and that's Annexes B and C to the appendix. The guidelines lay down very clearly steps for frontline staff to identify the needs of ethnic minorities, introduce the availability of, and proactively offer language services and arrange language services to those who need as appropriate. On data collection, the revised guidelines stipulate the requirement for public authorities to review all policy areas, identify policies and measures that people of diverse race may make use of, and also collect data on a regular basis. The guidelines also detail staff training matters. That the government should provide compulsory training on racial sensitivity and cultural diversity to frontline staff and new recruits, so as to develop their competencies in serving people of diverse race. A list should also be announced on the measures implemented, and that they should be published in 8 languages, such including Bahasa Indonesia, Hindi, Nepali, Tagalog, Thai, Urdu, Vietnamese, and Punjabi. The list should be available in the different government departments and also our Bureau's website. Chairman, our Bureau and the departments continue to maintain an overview on the implementation of the guidelines, as well as collate and publicize information. We welcome members' views on the administrative guidelines. We're welcome to hear from members any specific suggestions on the guidelines. We'll be happy to reflect the views to different government departments and bureaus. 4 members have indicated they wish to speak. Each will have 4 minutes, questions and answers included. Ms. Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chairman. The government improves and revises the administrative guidelines. I believe this is good deed. But after the Undersecretary read out the opening remarks, I can't help but feel that it is really a lot of hot air. You referred to a policy framework. Of course, there is nothing to criticize about. And then you talked about the collection of data from education, immigration to housing department under this framework. Well, please don't say it's an enhanced guidelines. Please don't always use the same terminology. For the revised guidelines, can you give us a timetable when exactly they will be implemented, when real work will be done? Don't always give us very vague statements about principles. And second question, I'm coming to that. For the anti-epidemic website, you refer to the different languages available. You refer to Urdu, Punjabi, etc. But if you click the anti-epidemic website for ethnic minorities, about enhancing racial sensitivity, etc., I don't see any specific part about tackling the epidemic. We do have instant translation or interpretation on a click. Can't this be done? Under Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Mo, for her comments. And I thank Ms. Mo for acknowledging our efforts on improving the administrative guidelines. The item was originally scheduled for the February meeting. It's been delayed because of the epidemic. But in fact, these administrative guidelines have been implemented on schedule at the start of this month. As for the COVID-19 government website, it contains vast information on different aspects. For example, anti-epidemic messages, 12 of them from the Center for Health Protection in 9 EM languages is widely circulated. I understand that this is well received by the EM groups as well. That's not true. At the district level, especially in To Kwa Wan, I received complaints from EMs. Had it not been district staff of the pandems doing home visits, explaining to them, many of them are still in the dark. In fact, the Labor Department, the Center for Health Protection, and the consular offices are in close liaison. And we welcome suggestions on areas of improvement. Thank you. Last point. On race discrimination. I'd like to know your stance. Race discrimination, of course, means discrimination on the grounds of a person's race. Am I right? Yes. All right, that's it for me. Next, Mr. Raymond Chan. Race Discrimination Ordinance, RDO, is the piece of discrimination law that contains the most flaws. In terms of implementation, there are already many problems. Public services will be guaranteed, but public services should not only be provided when the law requires so. Well, for example, we do not have any discrimination law on sexual orientation, but the government should take the lead in promoting anti-discrimination on the ground of a person's sexual orientation. Now, whether these administrative guidelines can be followed in real life is rather subjective. Even when the police officer makes arrests, even when prosecution is initiated, they always claim that there are stringent guidelines to follow. Is really a subjective point. But whenever we have internal and administrative guidelines, we need to be able to oversee its implementation. For example, we need to check the compliance of these guidelines. And there should also be a complaint mechanism, whether there will be disciplinary action if these guidelines are not followed. Say, it's just a set of guidelines, but at the front line we do need to provide training and education. In fact, in the paper, the government requires compulsory training on racial sensitivity and cultural diversity to frontline staff and new recruits. I'm quite concerned. Compulsory training could just mean 1 or 2 hours of seminar or talk. So I want to know more about the so-called compulsory training. We had a lawsuit. That's a classic case. An EM youth had a clash with a police officer in the street, and at the outset, the police officer had differential treatment on this young person. This matter was taken to the court, and then it is said that it is not covered by the RDO because law enforcement is not the same as provision of public service. So I'm really confused about the two. And the Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chan, for your comments. First, on the scope of the administrative guidelines, it applies to all government bureaus and departments, including the police. Second, what are the consequences if the guidelines are not complied with? As you know, the guidelines are in the public domain. We also collect data, and it's also in the public domain. The department's list of measures is also open to the public. We're happy to regularly review the situation. If there is any maladministration on the part of any government department, there are different avenues of following up on the matter. So complaints will be handled. The next point is about training. Indeed, it's an issue close to the heart of members. It is also important. The guidelines have been implemented for a decade, and the guidelines have been revised. We have made improvements, and we have provided additional resources to the EOC, in fact several $million on the training provided to civil servants. We are committed. In other words, government departments should each provide a list and report their progress to us. We do have a robust system. Chairman, crux of the matter, public service is under the guidelines, not law enforcement. That's we have the administrative guidelines. Next, Mr. Michael Look. The FTU has been striving to promote racial equality and inclusion. In November 2019, we announced an election policy statement relating to promoting racial equality. One suggestion is to revise the administrative guidelines. That's the crux of our discussion today. And we advocate the update of the government's performance pledge and the provision of public services to the ethnic minorities. Namely, language support service or translation interpretation service for EMs. Do you have any figures? Say, service recipients, and also figure on how long it takes for them to get access to the service. Second, the administrative guidelines on promotion of racial equality is built on racial discrimination. The word race is clearly defined in the Race Discrimination Ordinance. I understand at this moment, race does not include Chinese having different dialects, speaking different dialects, or coming from different regions. This may not be covered under the administrative guidelines either. But I do have a real question on the Secretary. We have Chinese people speaking different dialects of the Chinese language, and we do have many dialects. We have Chiu-Chao, Fujian, and also Hakka dialect. These are common dialects in Hong Kong. And sometimes there are communication problems when they try to have access to public service. Is there any way to go beyond this legal concept of race in the provision of public service? And by that I mean provision of translation or interpretation service. It's a rather innovative idea. And that is interpretation or translation service for Hakka dialect, for example. I think this is a service for new arrivals rather than EMs. We also have another service framework for new arrivals under the purview of the Home Affairs Department. I relay your view to them. What about EMs? Translation for EMs, do you have figures? The number of services provided, the waiting time.
For various government departments and related organizations, we provide interpretation services of different types. While the most widely known service is provided by Cheer Center, provided by the Hong Kong Christian Service and is subsidized by the Home Affairs Department. There are other organizations providing similar services. For example, the Lady Macleod Center provides services to the Hospital Authority, and the court interpreters can also provide services under certain occasions. Take the Cheer Center as an example. Every year they provide 5,000 provide service to 5,000 cases, and Indonesian, Nepalese, and Urdu are the languages most used by those requested the service. Dr. Leonard Wong, the DP, has long been very concerned about equal opportunity and racial equality. On the first sentence of the guidelines, it says that these guidelines provide guidance to all government bureaus and departments as well as related organizations. And they cover 13 bureaus and all the departments underneath these bureaus, as well as other related organizations. But in paragraph 3 of this paper, the government says that a total of 23 bureaus and directors and public authorities have adopted the guidelines, and they have drawn up the checklists of measures. So I would like to ask, there are definitely more than 23 bureaus and departments within the government. What about the others? How come that they have not adopted the guidelines? And the paper also says that the CMAB will be responsible for monitoring all the government departments and public authorities to see whether they follow the guidelines. Do you have anything to share with us in terms of your monitoring of these departments? Is it the case only that 23 bureaus and directors are following the guidelines, or is the case that other departments can't do it because of certain difficulties? The Development Bureau is an example. It's a very big bureau and is responsible for several development projects. Does it mean that they don't have to follow the administrative guidelines and racial equality? And also the Urban Renewal Authority, their supervising bureau is the Development Bureau. How come they are not covered under the guideline? Now, there have been recent complaints saying that at Kai Tak Road, Sapo Road development project, the government's publicity materials were only in Chinese and English in their redevelopment projects. But there were a lot of Thai people living there, and they can't read Chinese and English. And it's only after some really fighting that they've been able to get a Thai copy of the publicity materials. How come that there is such a great mistake? Is it the case that they refuse to adopt the guidelines? What are the difficulties? What is the result of your monitoring of the different departments so far? The paper was issued in February, and that reflected the data on that date. The meeting was originally scheduled in February. So on February, the guidelines have not been implemented yet. So on that day, we talk about 23 bureaus directors. And after the new guidelines have come into effect, all the government departments and bureaus are covered, including the Development Bureau. So 13 bureaus and all the government departments under them are covered. So all of them know. So they are implemented on a mandatory basis. I have another question. For this guideline, Is it legally binding or not? Is it just administrative guidelines? Yes, that's correct. So my question then is those who claim that they will implement the guidelines, and in the course of implementing the guidelines, they breach the guidelines and in their provision of services. So is there any complaint or appeal mechanism? Should we approach CMAB and ask you to help out? Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Wong. That's been a similar question before. So what will we do if the department doesn't follow an administrative guideline? Now it goes. It's like when some members of the public are complaining against certain administrative arrangements, and they can make a complaint against maladministration. Well, there have been many complaints of that sort in the past. So if you have any view on the government department, they can lodge a complaint according to the established mechanism. Well, there are different channels for lodging complaints. Well, even say the electrical does accept complaints, and also the ombudsman, and also there is an administrative mechanism within the government. Say if you are unhappy with the government department, you can reflect the same to the relevant government bureau. Now, in paragraph 1.7, it talks about that the CMAB is responsible for coordinating and maintaining the implementation of the guidelines. So you should be one of those who should be entertaining or receiving such complaints. We would be keeping a close eye on the overview, and we're happy that if there is certain irregularity in an individual department, then we are more than happy to handle it. But then we should know about, say, certain why malpractice within a certain department. But if there is an individual complaint, we are also happy to handle it. Mrs. Regina Yip. Chairman, the government proposed to say providing more interpretation services, collecting data, enhanced staff training. So I think that's an improvement. But you can't deal with the core issue, and that is discrimination. Within the society, there is still a lot of discrimination. So would you consider modeling after the UK? They have the hate crime. You are now just penalizing the service provider. So we are just talking about a service provider under the discrimination ordinances. But then for the hate crime in the UK, say based on a person's identity, of course, the law sets out clearly the protected characteristics. And say if you are a particular person, you are from the EM, from Chinese mainland, or you are a person of the sexual minority, you are a woman, you are a pregnant woman, then I scold you, harass you, bully you, intimidate you, then you would be breaking the law. Would you consider introducing a hate crime? Because within the society, there are very rampant intimidation and harassment behavior. So the UK is an advanced country as doing that. Would we consider it as well? Thank you, Mrs. Yip. At another occasion, Mrs. Yip raised a similar viewpoint, and that is about hate crime. Hate crime based on racial discrimination. Let me share some information. The present RDO, well, there are 2 articles dealing with such incidents. The question is whether they go far enough, and that deal with vilification and serious vilification. These are sections which you can deal with the sort of behavior you mentioned. And there is also, say, the public order ordinance covering that. I would also relay Mrs. Yip's view to the EOC. As you can remember, several years ago, the EOC has made recommendations of 27 priority amendments to the law, and we have dealt with some, and others have yet to be followed up. And in scrutinizing the law, different members have raised additional proposals on top of the 27. So we will look at that together with our amendment exercise. Another question. I didn't bring the book. It's The Rule of Law, authored by Lord Bingham. It talks about discrimination. We have discrimination on race, family status, and gender, etc. There are other types of discrimination that can be dealt with in the society, but it's not just a freestanding. It's it covers only provision of jobs and services, and we should not just limit our laws to cover the pregnant women's sexual minority, etc. As pointed out by Mr. Michael Leung, your identity, if you are from the mainland, you are not provided with a service, then that can also be tackled. So you if you are from the blue ribbon, the camp, and you are of different political stance, and you will not be provided with a service. This is also discrimination. So would you also be widening the law to cover all those areas as well, as suggested by Lord Bingham? Thank you, Mrs. Yip. There are 5 aspects to the definition of race: color, descent, and ethnic origin, etc. So Mrs. Yip is referring to something broader, for example, status of residence, nationality, and so on. And then another point. There are 4 discrimination ordinances in Hong Kong. They are in line with international discrimination laws. So they govern certain relationships. And Mrs. Yip is referring to major changes. I've heard your view, so let's go back and consider that further. If there is no other member who wishes to speak, so that's it for this item then. Thank you. The Undersecretary and from the CMAB, the government officials. The next item is the briefing by the Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data. The team joining us is Mr. Stephen Wong, Privacy Commissioner for Personal Data, and Mr. Tony Lam, Deputy Privacy Commissioner, and Ms. Rosanna Lord, Deputy Secretary for CMA. Those who would like to speak, please press the button. A warm welcome to the Commissioner, the Deputy Commissioner, and the Deputy Secretary.
好，專員，如果陣間安頓好之後咧，請你可以先同我哋介紹文件啊。
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I would like to thank the Chairman for giving me the opportunity to brief us, to brief you on our work last year, and I would like to thank members and the government for giving us advice and support in our work last year. I believe that members have got with you a paper. I don't want to go into the details of the paper, and in brief, I would like to talk about our duties and major work areas. In terms of our duties, compared to previous years, well, it's no different this year. 3 major roles: enforcement of the law, facilitating the privacy protection, and public education. And in terms of the work areas, there is no big difference. We are demand-led in our work. What differs this last year is that it relates to the quantity and quality of the workload. Last year, our workload has increased 20% year on year. And in terms of quality, in terms of compliance, inquiries, complaints, public education and publicity, we've seen new models and scenarios, and complicated issues have surfaced involving new professions, new technologies, and there are also major professional teams which are behind all these, and that has increased our workload substantially.
The other point relates to the recent doxing incidents and data breach incidents. We understand from these incidents that the public now holds high expectations on our work, on our position as well. These are new challenges. And I must thank our colleagues for the hard work last year as they devoted themselves in handling these incidents. On enforcement in 2019, the main concern involves not only a number of major data breach incidents. There is also another area of concern. All along, the PCPD has been regarded as, or the PDPO rather, has been regarded as the haven, but now it's become a weapon. And I'm referring to doxing incidents. We received close to 5,000 doxing cases last year, and personal data weaponization has become a major issue. From the examples we cited last year, and also the trend that we could identify, doxing of police officers accounted for 36% of the total cases, and also 30% for those supporting the government being doxed, and likewise another 30% for those not supporting the government being doxed. So despite the views, these victims are also victims of doxing. And in spite of them, the trend plateaued since January this year, probably due to the epidemic. And anyway, there has been a great concern on doxing. Apart from initiating investigation, the first thing we need to do is to minimize harm to the victims. We do not have any mandatory powers, but we can request online platform operators or discussion board operators to remove links and posts. According to the figures last year, about 70% of such data were removed. We have no investigative or prosecution power. So we referred 1,400 such cases to the police for further investigation. With advancement in technology rapidly, we have cloud computing, big data, and artificial intelligence. And Chairman, technology is giving a total overhaul of our work and life, and it also has a great impact on what personal data means to us. Against the backdrop of big data, the value of personal data gets ever higher. And we also have new breaches in the community relating to personal data privacy, even criminal offenses. This happens not only in Hong Kong, but also in other places around the world. Stringent measures should be put in place to protect the privacy of personal data. In 2018, EU General Data Protection Regulation was put in place as a catalyst different jurisdictions, including Hong Kong, are considering how we can catch up with this change in the privacy landscape so as to give better safeguards in a more stringent manner. In January this year, there was already a discussion on amending the PDPO. Paragraph 51 of our paper to your panel also sets out the details of this discussion. In the coming year, we hope to continue to work with the Bureau and other relevant departments and units on this front. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank members for their valuable views, including the submission from Asia Internet Coalition. It is a very representative organization, so we will give due regard to different views and will continue to amend the legislation in collaboration with other organizations. Now, the recent incidents also give rise to another problem that we've identified. Very often, the operator of these platforms may not be in Hong Kong, and we will continue with our overseas work with our overseas counterparts and explore the possibility of bilateral efforts and step up our liaison with overseas organizations to enhance the protection of cross-border personal data. As for the recent privacy incidents involving COVID-19, we understand that personal data privacy is very crucial, including contact tracing, checking if employees are working from home, and also online teaching at home. We believe that we should continue to work on our two other fronts. For example, we need to collaborate with stakeholders, in particular public organizations, to rationalize the use of personal data. Next, on education and publicity, we have published a number of guidelines. In fact, starting from this month, on 6 major social media platforms, we have uploaded some really user-friendly posts and information with a view to enhancing our effort in public education. Finally, apart from enlisting the support of different sectors and also enhancing the promotion of data ethics in the business sector, we also enhance our collaborative effort with SMEs on data governance and data stewardship, so that apart from compliance, SMEs can also attach importance to data ethics to strengthen consumer confidence and to enhance their business reputation, so that whilst enjoying the fruit of technological success, consumers need not worry about their privacy. Finally, we will continue to enforce the law fairly and impartially, and adopting the law as the only yardstick, and also to continue to be the facilitator and to give full play to the edge of Hong Kong to ensure free flow of information, economic development, and to ensure that an appropriate balance can be struck with the protection of personal data. Thank you for your report. I'll give the floor to members to ask questions. 4 minutes each. We'll start with Mr. Michael LEUNG. Thank you, Chairman. Regardless of our political views, we need to say no to cyberbullying and doxing. I am also one of the victims I believe many others are too, including Chairman. In last year's spate of black clad incidents and anti-extradition bill saga, many of us, including our family members, even friends, have become subjects or victims of doxing and cyberbullying. We need to face the issue squarely. Let me turn to the paper. In paragraphs 23 to 25, some 4,370 cases related to the riot incidents last year. 36% of them targeted police officers, and also 4% on public servants. Some 30% targeted members of the public who expressed support for the government or the police. But the prosecution figures are on the low side. For suspected breach of contravention of Section 64 of PDPO, only 8 were arrested, and only 1 arrestee was arrested or prosecuted for the offense of disclosing personal data obtained without consent from data users. Can you explain about the low percentage of prosecution? Is it due to manpower shortage? Or have you not attached sufficient importance to the matter? Are you paying lip service? Why is it that only 8 people were arrested and then only 1 man was charged? And also under Section 64 of the PDPO, evidence should be proffered. Now, by evidence, what do we mean? Say, one may be cunning enough to include a disclaimer in the post. This is for sharing only, and then it includes a link to another post. Then if somebody shares such a post, will that person be liable? Privacy Commissioner. Thank you, member, for the questions. Allow me to explain about the low prosecution figures. I cited the figure followed up on by the police, and we referred 1,400 cases to the police. Because of the limited powers given by the law, we do not have the power to directly investigate or prosecute. We can only identify evidence of a breach of or contravention of the ordinance, and then we refer 1,400 cases to the police for further investigation and then prosecution. I don't know the exact reason for the low prosecution rate, but one reason could be the gathering of evidence. In fact, even in our preliminary investigation work, we encounter this difficulty. Very often, the perpetrator may not use his real name, and we do not have a real name system, registration system in Hong Kong. Many platforms are not operated in Hong Kong. To require the platform to provide information about the perpetrator, it is not an easy task. We can only make such a request to no avail. But when we make a request for these posts to be removed, 70% of them would be removed. Of course, this poses a hurdle to prosecution. We'll also consider this point when we review the PDPO. What about sharing? Is it criminal? Privacy Commissioner, Mr. Leung asked another question. If you share a link, is it against the law? Well, I think it boils down to evidence, as I said. There may be wording included in sharing the link, and likewise, there is also difficulty just when we gather evidence to prove somebody's identity. If the wording is threatening, intimidating in substance, it's not only subjective, we also need to gauge the objective standard. We need to find the suspect as well as the victim. We need to identify both. And like I said, there is really little, slim chance that we could identify the perpetrator.
Mr. Christopher Zhang, I would like to follow up on the issue of doxing and cyberbullying. As we know, starting June last year, we've seen unprecedented doxing activities and cyberbullying in Hong Kong. And this is most stunning. I believe that doxing and cyberbullying are getting more serious. And the anti-extradition movement has torn the society apart, and then people's awareness of privacy data protection is not adequate. Some people are disclosing others' personal data, and also there were websites that invited citizens to provide the identity of protesters in order to bring them to justice. I believe that these people do not know that they are breaching the PDPO. So my question for the administration, would you do more public education work so that Hong Kong people know about the importance of upholding personal data privacy, and so that people will know that they should protect their own privacy as well as respect others? Now, in Annex B, there are a lot of public education activities carried out. They are professionally organized, but they don't seem to attract a lot of Hong Kong members of the public to participate. You have activities related to, say, data ethics, property management, privacy protection, etc. So I don't think the members of the public are interested in this kind of activity. Can you come up with more innovative and interesting activities to promote your cause? Say, for example, my friend took a photo, and this person was actually impersonating as a journalist in taking the photo, and he was standing in the way of the police's law enforcement. So I shared this photo. So is my behavior considered infringement on privacy? So you can really cite examples like those in your public education work. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for your comment. In terms of public education and publicity, actually, we spent a lot of resources on those fronts, and I would like to thank the Bureau for their support in our work in this area. We would do more. In the past, we used to place emphasis on conventional education models, say, for example, seminars. Actually, our seminars are very popular. A lot of organizations are actively training up their staff on privacy protection. And some professional organizations also have to have the CPD points and achieved, so they are also considering privacy protection activities. An advisory committee under the PCBD also suggests that we should be more down to earth in our promotion approach. So early this month, we tried for the first time to use simple and easy to understand approach. Yes, we've started that, and we would like to gauge its effectiveness. And on our website, we're using jargons used by the young people so that we can really reach out to them. Thank you, Mr. Kenneth Lau. I'm also concerned about cyberbullying. There are some figures. In 2019, 9,132 complaints have been received, and 4,700 are related to differing opinions in the social incidents last year, and most of them have to do with the doxing. 1,580 cases related to doxing, taking up 36%. And apart from public officers, there are also those who are in support of the government or the police have been doxed, accounting for 30% of the total number of cases. Some netizens have continuously doxed government officers and public figures. I'm very infuriated. The police work is to protect the safety of Hong Kong people and their properties, and they should not be subject to such bullying. I hope that the PCBD can strengthen the work in investigating into these cases and also refer more cases of breach of PDPO to the police for investigation and prosecution. So what more will the PCBD to deter people doxing government officers and police officers? And do you have measures to deter people in doing that? As I said in the beginning, we will continue to be impartial and fair in our enforcing the law. We would deal with the cases irrespective of the background identity of the people involved. So this is the only principle that we will be upholding in law enforcement. Maybe the tactics in enforcing the law may differ from case to case. Maybe because of the individual circumstances of the cases. People may have perceptions that we're dealing with cases differently. Say, for example, for news reporting and news gathering activities. Apart from exemption, there is the requirement that without the complainant coming forth, and if it is a complaint is lodged by some other unrelated people, the PCBD cannot be proactive in investigating into the incident. So this is really to protect freedom of the press. And some people asked why we are not proactively investigating into news activities. That's the reason why. Apart from that, even if we take the initiative to investigate, we browse through the websites, we receive complaints, we cite reports in the news media, we would embark on investigation work immediately. So we try to minimize the harm to the victims. The first thing that we do is to write to the website to remove the link. We issue them warning letters. We tell them that you have broken the law. And there are 2 injunction orders issued by the court already. And one is related particularly to the police officers and their family members. So we reminded them that they should post such warnings on their websites and they should not break the law. And at the same time, we conducted investigations asking them to hand over certain information. We did bump into difficulties. In law enforcement, we can't do something on a mandatory basis. And for some of the law-breaking websites, they are cited overseas. And on websites and social platforms popular among young people, we have set up an account, and we try to disseminate messages to them as quickly as possible, alerting them on what constitutes illegal act. So we are adopting a 2-pronged approach. We do law enforcement and do promotion work at the same time. So I can assure the member that we've been very quick in enforcing the law, but we do meet with certain constraints. There are occasions where we could not be immediately enforcing the law because we are constrained in some ways. We have to follow the legal provisions. Well, even if you remove the web links, the doxing has been done and the harm has been done. Dr. Helena Wong. Chairman, I have 2 questions. First is about Zoom. the communication software, and 10 million people were found to be using this on one single day. And the commissioner said that technology develops in leaps and bounds, and in the midst of the epidemic, a lot of people are using these, and there are criticisms that there isn't enough encryption, and there is possibility of hacking, and people's images and information will be stolen, and so on. So the commissioner said that, yes, technology is developing rapidly, but what can you do so as to prevent such acts happening? Or is it the case that you would only conduct investigation upon receipt of complaints? Secondly, the commissioner said that you are concerned about the cross-border data transfer. I have received inquiries from members of the public. They said that the police, that during public processions and demonstrations, would take footages and also photos of personal data of the participants. How do the police store such data? Would they be transferred to the Public Security Bureau of Guangdong Province? Will there be cross-border data transfer without the consent of the data subjects? Will the PCPD try to understand what's happening? Another related issue, the police during arrests recently would confiscate the arrested person's mobile phone. They don't need to ask the person for the password. They can actually go into the smartphone and get access to all the information. So PCPD, what is the right of the police in that? And what would be your directive to them? Do they have the right to, say, infringe upon people's privacy? So can you allow me more time to answer Dr. Wong's question? First, about video conferencing and teaching. There have been issues of security and privacy, data leakage, and so on. And maybe some people will hack into the meetings and things that should not be said, photos that should not be shown are actually being heard and shown. And that has to do with the software developers' responsibility. So what can we do? Several years ago, we issued a set of guidelines for software or app developers, telling them that if they design such an app, they should bear in mind some privacy issues. They should have privacy by design. Because if you develop an app or software for people's use, you must build into certain designs. Apart from that, last year, we worked together with our counterparts in Singapore, and we come up with a study. Because in the two places, we have a lot of startups and ICT companies. These enterprises would like to set up, say, design centers and R&D centers in these two places. We've come up with this new report, and recently, in our postings, we remind people to pay special attention to certain issues. Apart from press releases and postings on social platforms, you also wrote to school principals, alerting them of the risks in teaching. We know that the relevant developers are putting in place remedial measures. Second question about cross-border data transfer. Let me reiterate. Every government department or semi-government department or quasi-government department must abide by the PDPO to protect personal data. In monitoring the implementation of the PDPO, we treat everyone alike. Well, the public authorities take up around half of our work. We are not just monitoring private organizations. Now, public organization, especially the law enforcement agency, has different characteristics from private organizations. For example, they have to prevent or detect crimes. During the epidemic, we also have an exception, say if for upholding public health and for protecting other people's safety, there are certain exemptions which should not be invoked easily. In our recent discussion with the government departments, we told them if you want to invoke an exemption, you should first consider whether you have done your very best to meet with the legal requirements, including getting the minimum necessary personal data, and that there are limitations to how you use them, and if the data are no longer necessary, they should be deleted. And then if you are going to transfer the data to other parties, you should tell the data subjects and where are they being transferred to.
Privacy Commissioner, you clearly explained the guidelines, but my question was whether you are aware of how the police would make use of the data. Well, I need to declare that the meeting will be extended by 15 minutes because our time is up and we're short of time. Please be succinct, Privacy Commissioner. You've spent 6 minutes on this question alone. Let me say that if we identify such issue, if we receive a complaint, we'll definitely follow up on it. But if we do not receive any such complaint, we cannot just ask the other party to give an account of their practice. There must be a lot of complaints received, and when there is a need for us to intervene, we'll definitely do so. Thank you. We have 3 more members who have yet to ask questions. I'll draw a line here. Mr. Kim Yun. Chairman, I thank the Privacy Commissioner for coming to our meeting. I do have a question. In the beginning of this year, there was a media report about a school sponsoring body, and CCTVs were installed for the 25 kindergartens. There were cameras along the corridors, classrooms, teachers' room, etc. The picture could be zoomed in, even the audio would be captured, and the parents not being consulted. I understand that there is a set of guidelines from your office about the use of drones, and in the guidelines you advised that when installing CCTVs you need to strike a balance but you do not require stringent consultation. The guidelines don't come with any penalty either. I don't know whether there are other ways to monitor the situation of CCTV camera installation. Now my question is whether the Privacy Commissioner plans to regulate the installation of CCTVs by legislative means. And about installing cameras in the 25 kindergartens, I want to know whether you have received any complaints. Correct. On the installation of CCTVs and drones, we've issued a set of guidelines. Referring to the point made by Mr. Ip Kin Yun on the use of CCTVs, it is regulated, and we do receive complaints. We're not sure whether the complaints relate to the 25 kindergartens you referred to, but these complaints are rather common. Not only kindergartens, sometimes there may be CCTVs in office premises, in buildings, and also neighbors. Apart from giving advice, should they continue to breach the regulation, the law, we do proceed to prosecution. How it works is that when you install CCTVs, you need to spell out the purpose very clearly. That means you need to explain to the affected users very clearly the purpose of installing CCTVs and how you will deal with the personal data recorded by the CCTVs. It's quite similar to how we regulate the use of personal data in other areas. The most important thing is that for more private areas such as the washroom or the changing rooms, there must not be intrusion of personal privacy. As the court suggests, we should adopt the least intrusive measure to minimize any invasion into personal privacy. If there are ways that are less intrusive which are not adopted, we can assume that there is non-compliance. That is how we explain to the relevant parties every time. You need to explain clearly to the affected users. You also need express consent for them to be captured on cameras. So for public organizations and housing estates, we would advise the management to put a notice underneath the camera stating that the CCTV is in operation. In fact, in many housing estates, you would see the sticker. It's prepared by our office for use by these housing estates for the purpose of telling people that they have CCTV in operation. Chairman, he referred to putting up notices in public areas, but I just referred to a kindergarten is an organization at a fixed premises. Is it sufficient just to put up a notice? The notice seeks to inform the relevant individual, but our standard is not only to inform them, but to make them understand so that they make an informed choice to opt in or out. This is a way of expressing consent. But say for schools, they would explain usually to parents that it has to do with keeping order and maintaining security. So that really depends on how they communicate the matter. We look at every case on its own merits and the relevant scenarios, how they draw up policies on the use of CCTVs. Next, Mrs. Regina Ip. Thank you, Chairman. I have a number of questions about doxing. Commissioner, you said that you have no direct investigative power or prosecution power. You refer the cases to the police. Then will you propose that administrative powers be given to you in the future, say for them to be taken down immediately, for them to be deleted, although the server may not be in Hong Kong? These operators are, after all, run by local Hong Kongers, and you know very well who they are. They have business registration. They may also need to pay taxes. Would you recommend making such an amendment? So instead of applying for injunction orders, this is also one thing that we're considering. In actual operation, if we're given powers to mandate or compel the other party to do certain things, it may be more effective. So that's one way we're considering. In terms of actual operation, we have begun discussing with the government on refining our work. After all, we need to resolve this issue. Hong Kong is a free economy, and even so, they would store data in servers in other jurisdictions where we have no jurisdiction. Unlike the European Union, if you have affiliation with Europe, then if you provide service or product to a European within the EU, no matter where the service is provided, you will still be subject to their regulation. So theirs is a really stringent regulation. Please do it as soon as possible. Next, protecting a person's privacy is of course important, but it also contradicts with the development of big data. For example, the government is criticized by the public for giving cash handouts too late. In 2001, the $6,000 cash handouts were given, and then afterwards, all the data were destroyed, leading to another data collection exercise. In fact, under the DPP, data protection principles, you could have asked for consent from data subjects, because, say, the government may be giving cash handouts again in the future. So you could ask for consent to be expressed, so as to authorize the government to keep such data, for example, account information, so that we don't need to collect data afresh, because it takes a long time and we're often being criticized for acting too slow. About this is not a scenario in 2011. I think that if another cash handout is to be given, something like this will not happen again. But the government just told us that they've deleted data collected in 2011. So in the next data collection exercise, will you rely on the DPP and invite the data owner to give consent, because there could be future cash handouts, or perhaps it may not be necessary. There could be new technology. Maybe you can make use of fast payment service or a smart card or something. It would be much quicker without compromising personal data privacy. That's the principle. Our stance is to facilitate. In fact, when we have meetings with counterparts recently overseas, we get the same understanding as well. Will there be a second round, Chairman? I don't suppose so. First, I need to ask members' consent to extend the meeting further, because we have two other members who would like to speak, and Mr. Ray Chan is one. Say after Mr. Ray Chan has spoken, if some members would like to ask questions further, I may further extend the meeting. So let's extend the meeting by 15 more minutes. Mr. Ray Chan. The crux of my question is whether the PCPD can actively investigate into the police's conduct in the law enforcement action, whether there is any breach of personal data privacy. I need to give a disclaimer. I know this is a balancing exercise. Say, we need to fight the epidemic in these times, and I do agree that we need to collect more personal data than in other times. It's about whether you're harvesting excessive personal data, and whether the data so collected is used for the purpose of fighting the epidemic, and also afterwards how the data will be is handled, whether they'll be destroyed, be it a private organization or law enforcement agency. You should take note of that as well. There is an impression that the PCPD acted quite slowly in issuing guidelines in the course of fighting the epidemic, how we should pay attention to personal data privacy. I actually don't have a clear idea when exactly the PCPD issued such guidelines to law enforcement agencies or the private sector. And I'm not putting the blame on PCPD, because things happen really quickly. For example, under Cap 599, we have the prohibition of group gathering and other pieces of legislation. But there is a question on whether the police is collecting data in an excessive manner. Say if they go to a certain establishment and see if there is any contravention of the provision of group gathering, and you can of course fine the catering owner. If you see that there is only tables of 4, then there is no contravention. Say if you want to have ID checks on everyone, is that already abuse of power? Even during the times of the epidemic, the Privacy Commissioner should also be mindful about the law enforcement agency's conduct. Of course, we need to be tolerant at the same time. I don't know whether the police themselves are aware of the boundaries under Cap 599, but there is indeed a grey area in terms of privacy. And there could be abuse of power. Sometimes I think the court might have a problem in issuing warrants. Say if there is a room in the police headquarters that allows the police officers to unlock 3,000 mobile phones, and I'm not saying that the court is not empowered to do so. Say, of course, the police would need to apply for a warrant to gain entry because the occupier is reluctant to open the door. But say if you already confiscate all the mobile phones, then without asking the owner whether the mobile phones could be opened, and without their knowing, they could unlock 3,000 mobile phones with the help of a court's warrant. We can't help but raise a question. I want to know whether you have a statutory power to challenge the court's power. Well, I don't think you would do so, but in terms of personal data privacy, I wonder if you could do more.
Commissioner, thank you, Mr. Chan, for your questions. Every day, we consider personal data privacy issues. This is not just about personal data privacy. I hope that you can appreciate that. It also involves, say, investigation of crimes, criminal acts, and so on. That may go beyond our powers. This is not a task that we can take on. But from the perspective of enforcing the PDPO, if we found there is a fait accompli of breaching the law, and there are, say, issues which are of widespread concern in the community, the law empowers us to actively investigate into such issues. Recently, we have invoked that kind of power, and in a shopping mall, a police officer was displaying the identity card of the person under search in front of a camera. So in a few hours' time, we actually took the initiative to investigate into the police officer, and we found that a mistake was made, and the police officers was sort of reprimanded. So we did that, even to the police officer. Second question, can we do it quicker? Starting this month, I hope that I can tell Mr. Raymond Chan that using Twitter and Instagram, Facebook's YouTube, we are using such media to tell the media and the young people what we are doing. The first set of guidelines or directives was issued early this month, and a lot of other jurisdictions have yet to issue the guidelines. We issued press releases. And newspapers seldom carried news other than COVID-19 these days. But anyway, we used such new media to reach out to those who are not using the conventional media anymore. So we started doing this month. And we would also be issuing guidelines which have been published in the past using the new methods. Would you be also doing more regarding the public organizations? Part of the PDPO targets specifically the public organizations. And we will do more. But then we would not target the public organizations without good grounds. And I just mentioned this case about a public officer who is in a public organization. So we're doing things impartially and fairly, but we can only follow up on cases when there are really grounds for us to do so. Mrs. Regina Yip, second round. On the website of the PCD, the EU's GDPR has been mentioned. We can't model on some of the things that they are doing, but there are several principles which are quite interesting. First, it defines clearly the data subject. My personal data, for my personal data, I am the owner, and I will decide on whom to give my data to. And personal data are precious resource. In big data field, we call the data is the new gold or new oil. And then enterprises are required to set up a data protection officer post. Thirdly, enterprises are required to enhance the security system for protecting personal data privacy. We do the same because these can also create job opportunities. You should also promote open data while protecting personal data. How can government departments share data? Or else you won't be able to embark on big data initiatives. You can't do a lot of innovation projects. So can you consider doing that? Mrs. Yip, you have been very accurate in citing the important points in the EU regulation implemented 2 years ago. The concept behind is that the right to the data should actually be belong to the data subject. The right to own it, to use it, rests with the data subject. Well, we've been arguing this for a long time, whether it's a property, a law property, or intellectual property. On the mainland, there have been also suggestions regarding the obligations relating to the data subject and so on. So the EU said that the data belongs to the person. So the person has a right to control their use. So this is a central idea behind this regulation. And we think this is a much encouraged and feasible approach. And the DPO, the data protection officers, are those in the organizations controlling or managing the personal data. In Hong Kong, we have a similar approach. In the EU and the US, they say categorically that you should have a person in a senior post doing that work. Maybe even the director should be the personal data protection officer. We have to consult more on this. We have a lot of SMEs in Hong Kong in our privacy management program. We are also promoting the setting up of such a post. We also have a club, and we have enrolled 600 to 700 members in the club, and they are participating in the club's activities, and we can disseminate the latest information to them. Mrs. Yip referred to another issue of open data and security. To my understanding, the government is also working on it already. And that is how to open up the data. A year ago, I believe that the government has already tried to open up the data. We also discussed a lot about data security and personal data privacy protection. Recently, in the financial sector, banks and service sector, we see a lot of open data, open API in the banking field. We have talked to the Association of Banks, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and also the relevant chambers of commerce, and virtual banking and the security issues and so on. We have discussed all these issues among us. But then recently, we've not been paying so much attention on these. Now, you are doing OpenAPI, and the faster payment system is not difficult to set up, but then the linkages of the personal data are not that good. So the usage will be quite limited. I hope that the commissioner can study into that. Yes, exactly. We're exactly doing that, studying it. All right, that's it for this item. Thank you, Commissioner. AOB. There is no AOB. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.